What if the child you thought was sent to save the world was actually capable of ending it with a single word? What if the gentle savior of Christianity once struck down children with divine wrath, leaving their bodies cold and lifeless in the dust? Hidden away in the shadows of religious history lies a text so disturbing that the early church buried it deep, hoping it would never see the light of day. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas tells a story that will shatter everything you thought you knew about the childhood of Jesus Christ. This is not the meek and mild child of Sunday school lessons. This is a being of terrifying power, unpredictable rage, and deadly consequences. In this forbidden gospel, we encounter a 5-year-old Jesus who kills with curses, raises the dead on a whim, and strikes terror into the hearts of parents throughout Nazareth. Teachers flee in horror. Children drop dead at his feet. Parents beg Joseph to control his son before more blood is spilled. The very earth trembles beneath the footsteps of a divine child who has not yet learned mercy. Tonight, we venture into the darkest corners of Christian apocrypha, where miracles become nightmares and divine power manifests as something far more sinister than salvation. The church tried to erase this story for good reason. Some knowledge was never meant to be shared. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, but the shadows are calling, and the forbidden text awaits. Are you ready to meet the Jesus they never wanted you to know? Chapter 1. The forbidden text unveiled. Deep within the ancient libraries of forgotten monasteries and dusty archives, a collection of texts survived that the early Christian church desperately wanted destroyed. Among these forbidden writings lies the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, a document so unsettling that it was banned, burned, and buried for centuries. This is not the canonical Gospel of Thomas found in Nag Hammadi, but something far more disturbing, a detailed account of Jesus Christ's childhood that reads more like a horror story than a holy text. The manuscript surfaces from the 2nd century, written in Greek and later translated into Latin, Syriac, and other ancient languages. Unlike the 4 Gospels accepted by the Church, this text focuses exclusively on Jesus between the ages of 5 and 12, filling the mysterious gap in biblical accounts of his early years. What it reveals is a portrait of divinity unrestrained by human morality, a child wielding the power of creation and destruction with the emotional maturity of a kindergartner. The opening lines immediately signal that this is no ordinary religious text. The narrator introduces Jesus as the boy who performs fearful miracles and strange deeds. From the very first story, the tone is ominous. This Jesus does not multiply loaves and fishes or heal the sick he kills with a word and resurrects the dead as if they were toys to be played with and discarded. The historical context makes the text even more chilling. Written during a time when Christianity was still establishing its identity, this gospel represents an alternative understanding of Christ's nature, one that the church found so threatening they went to extraordinary lengths to suppress it. The early church fathers condemned it as heretical, warning that it portrayed Jesus as cruel and uncontrolled. They were right to be afraid. What makes this text particularly disturbing is its matter-of-fact presentation of violence. The author recounts each death, each act of divine retribution, with the same casual tone used to describe Jesus making clay birds come to life. There is no moral judgment, no condemnation of the child's actions, only the stark reality of power exercised without restraint or consequence. The manuscript tradition reveals how desperately the church wanted this story forgotten. Unlike other apocryphal texts that were simply neglected or ignored, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was actively hunted down and destroyed. Copies were burned, possession of the text was forbidden, and anyone caught teaching its contents faced severe punishment. The very survival of even fragmentary copies is a testament to how some people valued preserving this dark vision of Christ's childhood. The text structure follows an episodic pattern, moving from one disturbing incident to another with relentless momentum. Each story builds upon the last, creating an atmosphere of mounting dread as the reader realizes that this divine child recognizes no earthly authority and acknowledges no limits to his power. Parents live in fear, teachers cower in terror, and the community of Nazareth exists in a state of constant anxiety about what the carpenter's son might do next. What emerges from these ancient pages is a theological nightmare, a God child who has not yet learned compassion, a divine being operating with the impulse control of a toddler and the power to reshape reality itself. The church buried this text because it revealed a truth too terrible to acknowledge, that unlimited power in the hands of the immature, regardless of their divine nature, becomes a force of chaos and destruction. The forbidden gospel survived in fragments scattered across continents, hidden in monasteries from Ireland to Ethiopia, preserved by those who understood that even banned knowledge has value. These manuscripts tell us that the early Christian community grappled with questions that modern believers rarely consider. What was Jesus like before he learned mercy? How did divine power manifest in a child who had not yet developed human wisdom? The answers found in this text are more terrifying than comforting. Chapter 2. When divine power becomes deadly. The stories contained within the Infancy Gospel of Thomas read like a catalog of supernatural horror, each incident more disturbing than the last. The text opens with 5-year-old Jesus playing by a stream on the Sabbath, fashioning 12 sparrows from clay. When a fellow Jewish child scolds him for working on the holy day, Jesus responds not with explanation or apology, but with a demonstration of power that defies all natural law. He claps his hands, commands the clay birds to fly away, and they burst into life, chirping as they soar into the sky. This first miracle seems innocent enough, even wondrous. But the tone shifts dramatically in the very next passage. Another child, perhaps emboldened by witnessing the clay birds, dares to disturb the pools of water that Jesus has carefully arranged. The response is swift and merciless. Jesus turns to the boy and speaks words that will echo through the centuries. You unrighteous, ungodly ignoramus, what did the pools and water do to hurt you? See, now you also shall wither like a tree, and shall bear neither leaves, nor root, nor fruit. The child immediately withers away like a drought-stricken plant. His body crumbles, his life force drains away, and he collapses dead at Jesus' feet. The other children scatter in terror, running home to tell their parents that the carpenter's son has killed with a curse. This is not metaphorical language or symbolic storytelling. The text presents this as literal death, sudden and irreversible, brought about by a child's tantrum. The pattern repeats with horrifying consistency throughout the gospel. When a boy accidentally bumps into Jesus while running through the village, Jesus turns and declares, "You shall not continue your journey." The child falls down dead instantly. When another child throws a stone that strikes Jesus on the shoulder, causing him pain, Jesus responds with deadly fury. Your journey is finished. Again, immediate death follows the pronouncement. The most chilling aspect of these accounts is the casual nature of the violence. Jesus does not struggle with his decisions, does not show remorse, and does not seem to understand the weight of taking human life. These are not acts of considered judgment, but impulse reactions from a child who happens to possess the power of life and death. The text describes him playing normally one moment and dealing out death the next, as if both activities hold equal significance in his young mind. The community of Nazareth descends into a state of terror. Parents forbid their children from playing near the carpenter's house. Mothers clutch their sons' and daughters' clothes when they see Jesus walking through the streets. The boy becomes a pariah, isolated not by hatred, but by the primal fear of sudden death that surrounds him like an invisible storm cloud. Joseph, portrayed as Jesus' earthly father, finds himself in an impossible position. How does one discipline a child who can kill with a word? How does one teach restraint to someone who wields absolute power? The text shows Joseph pleading with his son, begging him to show mercy, warning him that his actions are turning the entire community against their family. But Jesus, still a child in emotional development despite his divine nature, seems incapable of grasping the lasting consequences of his actions. The resurrections that follow are almost as disturbing as the deaths themselves. Jesus eventually brings back some of his victims, but not out of compassion or remorse. He resurrects them to defend his reputation, to silence criticism, or simply because he grows bored with death and decides to experiment with life instead. The children who return from the dead are forever marked by their experience, carrying the knowledge that their continued existence depends entirely on the whims of a divine child who might snuff them out again at any moment. These stories reveal a theological crisis. that the early church could not resolve. Divine power without divine wisdom. Omnipotence without omniscience. The ability to create and destroy without the maturity to understand when such power should be exercised. The Jesus of this gospel is not evil in any conventional sense, but his very innocence makes him more dangerous than any deliberate malevolent force. Chapter 3. The teacher who dared to challenge God. Among all the dark tales woven throughout the infancy gospel of Thomas, none strikes more terror into the heart than the story of Zacchaeus, the schoolmaster who made the fatal mistake of trying to educate a god. This narrative stands as perhaps the most psychologically disturbing episode in the entire forbidden text, revealing the deadly consequences of challenging divine authority, even when that authority resides in the mind of a child. Joseph, desperate to give his strange son some semblance of normal childhood, brings Jesus to Zacchaeus' school in Nazareth. The teacher is described as learned and respected, a man who has spent years instructing children in reading and writing. He approaches his newest student with confidence, unaware that he's about to encounter something beyond human comprehension. The irony is profound, a mortal man attempting to teach the alphabet to the Word made flesh. Zacchaeus begins with the basics, as any good teacher would. He instructs Jesus to repeat the letter Alpha, the beginning of all learning. But Jesus refuses to comply. Instead, he fixes the teacher with a stare that seems to peer directly into his soul and poses a question that cuts to the heart of the absurdity. Tell me first what beta is, and I will tell you what alpha is. The child is demanding that the teacher prove his understanding of the second letter before demonstrating knowledge of the first. The teacher, perhaps thinking this is mere childish defiance, insists that Jesus follow proper order and recite alpha as instructed. This mundane act of educational authority triggers something terrible in the divine child. Jesus begins to speak, and the words that flow from his lips are not the simple letters of the alphabet, but a profound discourse on the mystical nature of language itself. He explains the spiritual significance of alpha and beta, their cosmic meanings, their role in the divine order of creation. But this display of supernatural wisdom is not given as a gift, it is delivered as judgment. As Jesus speaks, his voice takes on an otherworldly quality that fills the schoolroom with dread. The other children sense something wrong, something dangerous building in the air around them. The temperature drops. Shadows seem to lengthen despite the bright morning sun streaming through the windows. Zacchaeus realizes with growing horror that he is not teaching a child, but being instructed by something far beyond his understanding. The roles have reversed in the most terrifying way possible. The student has become the master, and the master is revealed as woefully inadequate. The teacher's face grows pale as he grasps the magnitude of his situation. He has attempted to educate the very source of all knowledge. The climax comes when Jesus fixes Zacchaeus with a look of divine displeasure and speaks the words that seal the teacher's fate. Because you have spoken without understanding, what you have taught shall be taken from you. The curse works immediately. Zacchaeus collapses, his body convulsing as if struck by lightning, his eyes roll back, showing only white. The knowledge he has spent a lifetime acquiring drains away like water through broken pottery. But death would have been a mercy. Instead, Zacchaeus falls into a state worse than death, alive but empty, breathing but bereft of all understanding. He can no longer read the letters he once taught. He cannot recognize his own name written on papyrus. The accumulated wisdom of years vanishes, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who stares at the world with the blank incomprehension of an infant. The other children flee the schoolroom in screaming terror. Parents arrive to find their respected teacher reduced to a mindless husk, drooling and making meaningless sounds, while Jesus sits calmly at his desk, completely unmoved by the destruction he has wrought. Joseph arrives to collect his son, offering apologies that ring hollow in the face of such devastation. This story reveals the most disturbing aspect of the infancy gospel's portrait of Jesus, his complete lack of proportional response. A teacher's mild insistence on following curriculum becomes grounds for the destruction of a human mind. The punishment bears no relationship to the offense, suggesting a divine nature that operates by alien logic, incomprehensible to mortal understanding. The fate of Zacchaeus serves as a warning that echoes through every subsequent story in the gospel. Those who challenge this divine child, even in the most innocent ways, face consequences that extend far beyond death. They face the obliteration of their very essence, the erasure of everything that makes them human. In the world of the infancy gospel, ignorance of Jesus' true nature is no protection, and good intentions provide no shield against divine wrath. Chapter 4. Legacy of Fear and Suppression. The infancy gospel of Thomas concludes not with redemption or moral growth, but with a community forever scarred by their encounter with unrestrained divine power. The final stories show Jesus gradually learning to control his abilities. But this development comes too late for those who paid the ultimate price for his education in humanity. The text ends with an older Jesus, around 12 years of age, beginning to show the wisdom and compassion that would characterize his adult ministry, but the shadows of his violent childhood linger like bloodstains that can never be washed clean. The church's response to this gospel was swift and decisive. By the 4th century, as Christianity consolidated its doctrine and established canonical scripture, the infancy gospel was officially condemned as heretical. The text was branded as dangerous to faith, misleading to believers, and incompatible with the image of Christ that the church sought to promote. But condemnation was not enough. Active suppression followed. Copies of the manuscript were systematically hunted down and destroyed, libraries were searched, private collections were confiscated, and anyone found possessing the text faced severe ecclesiastical punishment. The goal was complete eradication, the total erasure of this alternative vision of Christ's childhood from human memory. The church understood instinctively that this story posed an existential threat to their message of divine love and salvation. Yet despite these efforts, the gospel refused to die completely. Fragments survived in remote monasteries, hidden in secret chambers, and buried beneath more acceptable texts. Scholars in medieval times whispered about its existence, passing down knowledge of its contents through careful oral tradition. The text possessed a strange vitality, as if the very power it described protected it from total annihilation. The reasons for the church's fear become clear when we consider the theological implications of the gospel. If Jesus truly possessed full divine power from birth, what does that say about the nature of God? If the incarnate deity could act with such casual cruelty as a child, what assurance do believers have of divine mercy? The gospel raises questions that strike at the foundation of Christian faith, suggesting that divine nature might be fundamentally alien to human concepts of justice and compassion. Modern scholars who have studied the surviving fragments report a strange unease when working with the text. The stories seem to carry an inherent darkness that extends beyond their disturbing content. Some describe feeling watched while reading. Others report nightmares featuring the divine child from the gospel. Whether these experiences reflect the power of suggestion or something more mysterious remains an open question. The psychological impact of the gospel extends beyond individual readers to entire communities of faith. In regions where the text has circulated, even in academic contexts, there are reports of increased anxiety among religious populations, declining church attendance, and a general sense that something fundamental has been disturbed. The forbidden knowledge seems to carry its own curse, affecting all who encounter it. The survival of the infancy gospel of Thomas serves as a reminder that the early Christian community was far more diverse in its beliefs than modern denominations acknowledge. Multiple competing visions of Christ's nature existed, and the version that ultimately triumphed was not necessarily the most historically accurate, but rather the most psychologically palatable. The church chose comfort over truth, hope over horror. The text continues to surface periodically throughout history, appearing in unexpected places and times. Medieval manuscripts, Renaissance collections, and modern archaeological discoveries have all yielded new fragments or complete versions. Each emergence is accompanied by controversy, scholarly debate, and renewed attempts at suppression. The gospel seems to possess an almost viral quality, spreading despite all efforts to contain it. For those brave enough to confront its contents, the infancy gospel of Thomas offers a glimpse into a universe where divine power operates without human restraint, where the line between miracle and atrocity dissolves completely. It forces readers to grapple with uncomfortable questions about the nature of power, the development of morality, and the terrifying possibility that the divine might be fundamentally incompatible with human concepts of good and evil. The legacy of this forbidden text extends far beyond its historical significance. It represents humanity's deepest fear about the divine, that God might be utterly alien to human understanding, that divine power might operate according to logic so foreign to our experience that we cannot hope to comprehend it. The gospel suggests that our salvation might come not from a being who shares our values, but from something so removed from human nature that its benevolence, when it finally emerges, is not evolution, but revolution. The shadows cast by the infancy gospel of Thomas reach into the present day, challenging believers and skeptics alike to confront the possibility that the familiar Jesus of traditional Christianity might be only one face of a far more complex and terrifying divine reality. The banned gospel whispers from the darkness, reminding us that some knowledge, once uncovered, can never be completely buried again. The divine child walks among us still, and his shadow falls longer than we dare to imagine.